When I was 11 years old, my own father looked me in the eyes, handed me a trash bag filled with my clothes, and told me I wasn't welcome in his house anymore. For 20 years, I believed he simply stopped loving me. Then one unexpected letter destroyed everything I thought I knew. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Marin Calloway, and this is the story I never thought I would tell. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest. When I was little, life felt safe. My dad, Dorian Calloway, wasn't the kind of father who smiled all the time, but I always knew he cared about me. He worked hard, came home tired, and still made time to help me with homework or sit beside me during dinner. Everything changed after my mom passed away. Losing her broke me, but it also changed my father. He became quiet, distant, and harder to understand. A year later, he married a woman named Lenora. She moved into our house with her son, Blaine. At first, I wanted us to be a family. I tried to be kind to both of them. I helped around the house, stayed out of trouble, and did everything I could to make life easier. But no matter what I did, Lenora always found something wrong with me. If a glass broke, it was somehow my fault. If Blaine got into trouble, she blamed me. She spoke softly whenever my father was around, making herself look caring and patient. The moment he left the room, her smile disappeared. Day after day, she whispered things about me to my father. I could never hear every word, but I knew she was turning him against me. Slowly, he stopped talking to me. He stopped asking about school. He stopped wishing me good night. Every time he looked at me, it felt like he was looking at a stranger instead of his daughter. I kept hoping things would get better. I believed if I behaved perfectly, my father would remember who I was. Instead, everything fell apart one cold evening. My father called me into the living room. A black trash bag sat on the floor. Inside were a few shirts, jeans, my old sneakers, and the only photo I had of my mom. Without looking away, he told me to pick it up and leave. I stood there frozen, waiting for him to say it was a mistake. He never did. I walked out of the house carrying everything I owned in one bag, believing my father had chosen his new family over me. That night, my elderly Aunt Celeste Rowan opened her door, hugged me without asking questions, and gave me a place to sleep. From that moment on, my old life was over. Life with Aunt Celeste was nothing like the life I had before, but it was filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time: kindness. Her little house was old and needed repairs. The roof leaked when it rained, and the heater barely worked during winter. Money was always tight. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices early in the morning and serving food at a small diner in the evenings. She came home tired every night, yet she still asked me how school had gone and made sure I had something warm to eat. Watching her work so hard made me promise myself that I would never waste the chance she had given me. Even though she treated me with love, I couldn't forget what had happened. Deep inside, I felt like I could be left behind again at any moment. I stopped asking people for help. I stopped expecting anyone to stay. If something needed to be done, I learned to do it myself. That became my way of surviving. School slowly became the only place where my mind felt peaceful. When I sat in a classroom, I didn't have to think about the past. I buried myself in books, finished every assignment early, and stayed after class whenever teachers offered extra work. Learning gave me something nobody could take away from me. My teachers noticed how hard I worked and encouraged me to dream bigger than our small town. I listened, but I never told them the real reason I pushed myself so hard. Every year, when my birthday came around, a small part of me waited for the phone to ring. I imagined hearing my father's voice, even if it was only for a few seconds. I hoped he would say he was sorry or ask if I was okay. The call never came. By the end of each birthday, I quietly accepted that another year had passed without him thinking about me. After a while, the sadness turned into determination. I stopped wishing he would come back. Instead, I decided that one day he would see what he had thrown away. I told myself that the best revenge wasn't yelling or crying. It was building a life so successful that he would regret his decision every time he thought of me. That thought kept me moving forward whenever life became difficult. My hard work paid off during my final year of high school. I earned several scholarships that covered my college education. The day the acceptance letters arrived, Aunt Celeste cried harder than I had ever seen. She said she had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Leaving for college felt like the start of a new chapter, but I carried more than clothes in my suitcase. I carried years of hurt, unanswered questions, and a wound that success could not heal. No matter how far I traveled, the little girl who had been sent away at 11 never truly disappeared. College changed many things for me. I discovered that I had a talent for finding mistakes hidden inside numbers. While other students found accounting boring, I enjoyed solving difficult financial puzzles. One professor encouraged me to study forensic accounting because it combined careful investigation with finance. I followed that advice, and after graduation I found work with a respected firm. Over the years, I earned a reputation for being honest, patient, and impossible to fool. Clients trusted me because I never ignored small details. My career continued to grow, and I was finally able to give myself the kind of life I had once believed was impossible. I bought my first home, a quiet place with a small front porch and a backyard where I could sit after work. It wasn't a huge house, but every payment came from my own hard work. Walking through the front door each evening reminded me that nobody could take this life away from me. Even though my career was successful, my personal life looked very different. I kept people at a distance. Friends invited me to parties and family gatherings, but I usually found reasons not to go. A few kind men tried to get close to me over the years, yet I always pulled away before the relationship became serious. Trust never came easily. Somewhere inside me, I believed that if my own father could stop loving me, anyone else could leave too. Work became my safe place because numbers never lied and never betrayed me. One afternoon, while I was finishing a report, I received an unexpected phone call from someone back in my hometown. The caller quietly told me that my father was seriously ill. For a few seconds, I didn't know what to say. Then I thanked the caller and ended the conversation. I placed my phone on the desk and went back to work as if nothing had happened. I convinced myself that he had made his choice years ago. If he was alone now, that was the life he had created. I refused to feel guilty for staying away. A few weeks later, another letter arrived in my mailbox. This time it carried different news. My father had passed away. I stared at the paper for a long time, waiting to feel something. Anger, relief, sadness, anything. Instead, there was only silence. It felt strange knowing that the man I had spent so many years blaming was gone forever. Inside the same envelope was something else. It was a smaller sealed envelope with my name written across the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. It belonged to Dorian Calloway. My hands froze as I looked at it. After 20 years without hearing a single word from him, he had somehow found one last way to reach me. I had no idea whether opening that envelope would finally bring me peace or tear open every wound I had spent my life trying to hide. For 2 days, I left the sealed envelope sitting on my kitchen table. Every time I walked past it, I looked away. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading a single word. Another part wanted answers that I had waited most of my life to hear. On the third evening, I finally picked it up. My hands shook as I carefully opened it and unfolded the pages inside. The first sentence stopped me cold. My father wrote that he was sorry. He said there were no words strong enough to repair the damage he had caused. As I kept reading, he admitted that throwing me out was the biggest mistake of his life. Then I reached the sentence that made no sense at all. He wrote that he had never stopped loving me, not for one single day. I stared at those words, reading them again and again. They felt impossible. If he had loved me, why had he let me leave? Why had he stayed silent for so many years? My anger returned immediately. I almost laughed because it sounded like an excuse from someone who no longer had to face the consequences. I wanted to tear the letter into pieces. Before I could, I noticed one final request near the bottom of the page. My father begged me not to judge him until I visited a certain bank. He included the name of the branch, the number of a safety deposit box, and a key that had been attached to the letter with clear tape. He wrote that everything I needed to know was waiting there. He ended by saying that if I wanted the truth, I had to see it with my own eyes. I sat alone in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the small key resting in my hand. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself nothing inside that box could change what had happened. I even carried the letter to the trash can and held it over the opening. My fingers slowly loosened, but before I let go, I stopped. Questions I had buried for years suddenly came rushing back. I couldn't ignore them anymore. The next morning, I drove to the bank listed in the letter. The building looked ordinary, and the employees treated me politely after checking my identification and the paperwork. A manager led me into a secure room and placed the safety deposit box in front of me before quietly leaving. I took a deep breath and unlocked it. I expected to find old family photographs, maybe a piece of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, or a few personal keepsakes. Instead, the box was packed with thick folders, legal papers, handwritten notes, and sealed envelopes arranged with surprising care. The first document I picked up contained information that made my heart race. Before I had read even a few pages, I realized this wasn't about old memories. It was evidence, and every page raised a new question about the life I thought I understood. I slowly went through every folder inside the box. The more I read, the harder it became to breathe. There were legal papers, medical records, and several handwritten journals that my father had kept over the years. Each page seemed to answer one question while creating another. At first, I thought the papers were unrelated, but as I arranged them in order, a clear picture began to appear. It was nothing like the story I had believed for most of my life. One group of documents showed copies of financial records from shortly after my mother's death. Attached to them were reports from experts who had examined signatures and handwritten notes. According to those reports, several important documents had been forged. The signatures that appeared to belong to my mother were fake. My father had written page after page explaining how he eventually learned that Lenora had created those false papers. She had made it look as though my mother had secretly taken money from the family before she died. My father believed those lies because the documents looked real. As I continued reading, I found another painful discovery. There was a bundle of old letters tied together with a faded ribbon. Every one of them had been written by Aunt Celeste. She had sent letter after letter over the years, asking my father to let me hear his side, or at least give him a chance to speak with me. None of those letters had ever reached me. My father explained that he found them hidden among Lenora's belongings many years later. She had kept them from both of us, making sure we remained separated. My chest felt tight as I imagined all the birthdays, holidays, and ordinary days that could have been different if even one letter had been delivered. The journals became more emotional as the years passed. My father described the moment he first started noticing small lies that didn't match the facts. At first, he ignored them. Then more strange things happened, and he began checking old records himself. Little by little, he realized he had been manipulated. By the time he understood the truth, I was already gone. He didn't know where I lived, and every attempt to find me seemed to fail. Instead of giving up, he quietly collected every piece of evidence he could find. He wrote that he hoped one day I would read everything with my own eyes because he knew I would never believe simple words after everything that had happened. I closed the final journal and sat in complete silence. For years, I had carried nothing but anger toward my father. Now that anger was changing direction. The person I blamed for destroying my childhood was no longer the only one responsible. My thoughts kept returning to Lenora. She hadn't just lied. She had carefully destroyed a family, stolen years that could never be replaced, and made sure the truth stayed hidden. For the first time, I realized that the greatest betrayal had come from someone who had smiled at me while quietly ruining my life. I could have closed the box, driven home, and tried to forget everything again. Instead, I made a different choice. My father had spent years collecting pieces of the truth, but I wanted to know the whole story. As a forensic accountant, I knew how to follow financial records and find hidden patterns. I requested copies of business files that were listed in the documents and began comparing them with public records. It took many late nights, but the numbers slowly started telling their own story. Money had been disappearing from my father's business for years. At first, the missing amounts were small enough to escape attention. Later, they became much larger. The transfers were hidden through fake expenses, false invoices, and accounts that should never have existed. Every trail led back to the same person. Lenora had been taking money from the business while making it appear that trusted employees were responsible for the losses. I also discovered that Blaine had not been an innocent bystander. His name appeared on several company records connected to fake businesses that existed only on paper. He had signed documents, approved payments, and helped move money from one account to another. The evidence showed that he knew exactly what was happening. Together, they had built a system that allowed them to steal without attracting attention for many years. I contacted a few former employees whose names appeared in the records. Most of them had already retired or moved away. At first, they were nervous about talking. They had spent years believing nobody would listen to them. Once they learned who I was and saw the documents I carried, their fear slowly disappeared. One former manager admitted that he had always suspected something was wrong, but could never prove it. Another employee said she had been blamed for missing money and lost her job because of accusations that were never true. Others shared similar stories. They had all been treated as if they were dishonest while the real thieves remained protected. Every conversation added another piece to the puzzle. The truth became impossible to deny. The lies had not lasted a few months or even a few years. They had continued for decades. As I reviewed everything together, I realized something that hit me harder than any document. I had spent most of my life wondering what was wrong with me. I believed I had failed as a daughter. Now the evidence showed something completely different. I had never been the problem. My childhood had been stolen by careful planning, endless lies, and people who cared more about money than family. The pain I carried for so many years had been built on a false story. Knowing the truth did not erase the past, but it gave me something I had never truly possessed before. It gave me certainty. And with certainty came the courage to make sure everyone responsible finally faced the consequences of what they had done. I thought about driving straight to Lenora's house and demanding answers. I imagined asking her why she had destroyed so many lives. But after everything I had learned, I knew that anger would give me nothing. She had spent years creating lies. I wasn't going to make the mistake of fighting her with emotions. I decided to let facts speak for me. I organized every document, every bank record, every witness statement, and every report into a complete timeline. I checked every detail more than once because I wanted the truth to be impossible to deny. When everything was ready, I turned the evidence over to the proper investigators. I answered every question they asked and gave them copies of everything I had found. After that, I waited. It wasn't easy. Legal investigations move slowly, but I knew rushing would only weaken the case. Weeks turned into months as experts reviewed financial records and interviewed former employees. Eventually, the investigations confirmed what the documents had already shown. Civil lawsuits were filed against Lenora and everyone connected to the fraud. The missing money, the fake companies, and the forged records were finally brought into the open. More evidence continued to appear as the investigation grew. People who had stayed silent for years were finally willing to tell the truth because they no longer feared being blamed. Lenora had spent years protecting her image. People in town believed she was honest, generous, and respectable. That image disappeared piece by piece as the facts became public. Every official report revealed another lie she had hidden for years. The reputation she had worked so hard to build collapsed under the weight of the evidence. Blaine also faced the results of his choices. The businesses connected to the fraud were investigated, and the money linked to those companies was frozen. Everything he had gained through dishonest actions was taken away. The comfortable life he had enjoyed disappeared because it had been built on stolen money. I never visited either of them. I never called them or wrote a letter. There were no angry speeches, no dramatic meetings, and no shouting. They already knew why everything was happening. My job was simply to make sure the truth reached the people who could act on it. Sitting quietly and watching justice move forward gave me a feeling I had never expected. It wasn't happiness because nothing could return the years I had lost. It wasn't excitement because too much damage had already been done. It was something calmer than that. It was peace. For the first time since I was 11 years old, I no longer felt powerless. I didn't need revenge through anger or revenge through pain. Watching every life fall apart one by one was enough. The truth had waited a long time to be heard, but once it finally came into the light, nobody could bury it again. After everything that had happened, I felt there was one place I still needed to visit. I drove back to the house where I had spent the first years of my life. It looked smaller than I remembered. The paint had faded, the front porch needed repairs, and the garden my mother once loved was gone. I stood outside for several minutes before walking to the front door. Since the legal process had already started, I was allowed to enter the property. Every room brought back memories I had tried to forget. Some were happy, while others were painful. I slowly walked through the house until I reached my father's old bedroom. Inside a closet, I found a wooden box hidden on the top shelf. When I opened it, I froze. It was filled with photographs of me. There were pictures from school events, birthdays, and even my college graduation. I had never seen anyone taking those pictures. Some showed me standing with classmates. Others captured moments when I was walking across a stage to receive awards. My father had kept every photo carefully organized by year. None of them had been displayed anywhere. It was as if he had collected pieces of my life in secret. I sat on the floor holding those pictures, unable to understand why he had stayed hidden all those years. As I left the house later that afternoon, one of the elderly neighbors recognized me. She smiled sadly and asked if I was Marin. When I said yes, she quietly told me something I never expected to hear. She said my father had often come to my school events without letting anyone know. He would stand far away where nobody noticed him. He watched my middle school graduation, my high school graduation, and even my college ceremony. According to her, he always left before anyone could speak to him. She remembered asking him once why he never walked over to congratulate me. His answer was simple. He said he didn't believe he deserved to stand beside me after what he had done. Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. My father had not forgotten me. He had been close enough to see important moments in my life, but too ashamed to take a single step toward me. I realized he had spent the rest of his life carrying guilt that never left him. He wanted to fix the past, but every year that passed made it harder for him to begin. As I drove away from the house for the last time, my emotions became impossible to separate. Part of me wanted to forgive him because I finally understood how deeply he had regretted his choices. Another part still grieved for the little girl who had needed her father and never had him beside her. I didn't know if forgiveness would ever come completely. I only knew that the truth had changed the way I looked at the man I had blamed for so many years. Many months after the investigation began, the legal process finally came to an end. I sat quietly inside the courtroom and listened as the judge explained the final decision. The evidence was clear, and there was no room for doubt. The court ruled against Lenora. The financial records, witness statements, and expert reports had proven exactly how the money had been stolen over the years. Everything she had worked so hard to hide had been uncovered. I didn't feel excited when I heard the decision. I simply felt that justice had finally reached a place where it had been missing for far too long. After the ruling, the process of recovering the stolen assets began. Properties, bank accounts, and other valuables connected to the fraud were collected and divided according to the law. Because I was Dorian's only legal daughter, part of the recovered estate belonged to me. When my attorney explained how much I would receive, I stayed silent for a long time. The money was more than enough to change my life, but I already had everything I truly needed. A safe home, a steady career, and peace of mind were worth more to me than another bank account. Then I remembered something Aunt Celeste had often talked about during the years we lived together. She always wished there was a way to help children who had been abandoned by their families. She believed those children deserved the same chance she had tried to give me. She never had enough money to make that dream real, but she never stopped believing in it. I decided that the money should be used for something bigger than myself. I worked with lawyers and local community leaders to create a scholarship fund for young people who had been left without the support of their parents. The scholarships would help them pay for school and build a future they could be proud of. Every student who received help reminded me that pain did not have to be the end of someone's story. It could become the beginning of hope for someone else. A few days after everything was finished, I visited my father's grave for the first time. I stood there quietly with fresh flowers in my hands. The wind moved gently through the trees as I looked at his name carved into the stone. I spoke to him as if he were standing beside me. I told him that nothing could erase the night he sent me away. Those years could never be returned, and the hurt would always be part of my life. But I also told him that I no longer wanted to carry hatred inside my heart. I had spent too many years living with anger. I wasn't choosing to forget what happened. I was choosing not to let it decide the rest of my future. I placed the flowers beside his grave, took one last look, and walked away feeling lighter than I had in many years. As I look back on my life now, I often think about the 11-year-old girl who walked away from her home carrying a trash bag filled with everything she owned. For many years, she believed she wasn't good enough to be loved. She thought she had done something so terrible that her own father no longer wanted her. That belief followed me through childhood, college, and even into my career. It shaped the way I saw myself and the way I treated other people. I spent years trying to prove that I had value because deep inside I believed I had lost it a long time ago. Now I know that little girl was never the problem. She was only a child who became trapped in a web of lies she could not understand. The greatest betrayal was not that my father stopped loving me. The greatest betrayal was that someone poisoned our family with lies until we could no longer see the truth. Those lies stole years that can never be returned. They changed the course of our lives and left wounds that stayed with all of us. My father made a terrible decision, and he carried the weight of that mistake for the rest of his life. I wish he had found the courage to come to me sooner. I wish we had been given the chance to sit together, tell the truth, and begin again while he was still alive. That chance never came. Justice arrived too late to give us the relationship we lost. But it was not too late to uncover the truth. Knowing what really happened gave me something I had searched for since I was a child. It gave me answers instead of endless questions. It allowed me to stop blaming myself for something that was never my fault. If there is one thing I have learned, it is that life is not always as simple as it seems. Sometimes the person who hurts you is acting on lies they believe are true. That does not erase the pain they caused, but it can change the way you understand the past. At the same time, the people who create those lies often stay hidden, looking kind and innocent while quietly destroying lives from the shadows. That is why the truth matters so much, even when it takes years to find it. If my story teaches anything, it's this: never let someone else's lies decide your worth. Do not measure your value by the choices other people make. You may spend years searching for answers, and the truth may arrive much later than you hoped. But when it finally does, it has the power to change everything. It cannot give you back the time you lost, but it can free your heart from carrying a burden that never belonged to you in the first place. And sometimes that is the greatest gift of all.